Hello, my dear friends. This is our weekly Facebook interview, and I am so excited today to have John Fox with us. I just recently actually met John, but I've known about his work for many years. He is the author of a wonderful book called Poetic Medicine, and Tom will put the link in there for us. The Healing Art of Poem Making, and he also wrote an earlier book called Finding What You Didn't Lose, Expressing Your Truth and Creativity Through Poem Making. He's also the president and founder of the Institute of Poetic Medicine. So we have so many wonderful things to talk about with John. So I'm just going to bring him on right now and let's get started. Hey, John.
Hi, Wanda. Nice
Yeah.
to be here with you.
Yeah, it's great. I've been thinking about this for 2 months now since we talked about doing it.
Right.
When I reach out to people, I never know if they're going to say yes or no or maybe, but I am so grateful that you said yes because I think the message that you have to bring to the world is it's so critically important. And so I'd like for you to just start by maybe telling us a little bit about how you got interested in poetry and then maybe how poetry can be healing. I mean, that's a big subject in and of itself, but
Indeed.
just tell us a little bit about you
Oh,
and your
okay.
poetry.
Well, again, thank you for inviting me.
Mhm.
So, how did I get interested in poetry? And of course, I can share my story, the where I sort of stepped into that river, what we'll call poetry, and other people have their stories too, and those are no less significant than mine. Um, so for me, at some point early on, I would say that I'd have to say the word "get interested" is not quite right. It's like, how did I feel that it was like breathing, like,
Mhm.
one doesn't really get interested in breathing, one has to breathe and will fight hard to breathe. Certainly, that's not it's maybe even more, relevant these days, given our worldwide experience about the importance of breath and breathing.
Yeah.
So I don't want to sound too esoteric about that, but I think there is two kind of currents, strong currents that wove themselves together. Um, and this is, again, when I was 12 or 13, or going from 12 to 13, or I was just 13, I remember I was at a skating rink in Shaker Heights, Ohio, called Thornton Park. And I remember it was winter. And so Thornton had a pool, but they also had a skating rink. So I remember watching, and this of course, my story, but watching a girl skate alone on this big skating rink. And I still remember, I believe she was wearing like a chocolate brown, skating outfit, but she was moving along the ice, and I found myself with a notebook in my hand, and I was trying to write down what my experience was in experiencing this girl skating. And although people will say, well, that sounds a little sophisticated for a 13-year-old, but I was interested in how the words could skate on the page. So
Oh,
when someone read my poem, they would see what I meant, or what I saw, actually, even more exactly than what I meant. So I have to say that experience and the sort of enjoyment, the challenge of making something, and maybe I draw back even years before. Like I remember in second grade, my second grade teacher, Miss Watkins, would take the back page of, this is 1962, so Life magazine was a big thing in those years. So she took the back page of Life magazine, which was called Miscellany, and it would always be some kind of unusual or odd, even odd photograph. And she would put that on a cardboard and lean that on a piano bench against a piano and say, let's write a story. So I remember I just enjoyed making something. And so then I'll go back to my experience as a 13-year-old watching this girl skate and wanting to make something on the page that could express my experience. So I said there was two currents. So I'm going to put that current in the I don't want to call it a category, but the space of beauty, of being moved by something in life, by having my attention caught and finding words for that. And then the second current I'm going to describe, which not probably, it leaned me into the healing world, although I wouldn't have called it that back then, because even then at 12 or 13, I had been having pretty severe problems with my right leg, which below the knee, which required multiple surgeries. And so I remember, I don't think I did that quite at that young age, but in my mid-teens, or I began to write about my experience of having this medical issue, this actually physical body issue, and finding words for that. Maybe later when we share some poems, I can say some poems that happened in my late teens at that time. So that's the place I would put the healing nature of poetry in my life, because in some ways it was unspeakable. There was a lot of pain. There was a lot of ways that it hampered my living in even though I was determined. Like I remember in 7th grade, Wanda, I wanted to play football, and my mother said, that's crazy. You should not play football. But I was stubborn, very stubborn, and I just insisted. And so finally she said, well, we're going to go to your orthopedic surgeon and ask him what he thinks. I think she thought, it was a slam dunk, as we say, on her side. But then she shared her point of view, I shared my point of view, and Dr. Kendrick said, well, I think he can play if he does this, if he gets a shin guard, and if he does this. So I'm saying that because I felt, even with this trouble that ended up at the age of 18, my leg was amputated below the right knee. Wow. And so but I had been also fallen in love with just the poetry, and so I decided to go to school, to Boston University, where they had a great writing program. And I did research. I found that out when I was a junior in high school. So, and then my leg was amputated, and it caused a whole, sort of dark night of the soul, to be honest. And one of the main teachers of that in that Boston University creative writing department was a wonderful, profound poet named Anne Sexton.
Oh yeah, I've heard of her.
Well, people have heard of her, and you've heard of her, and I certainly had heard of her. But in October of 1974, which is when I would have begun to study with her, she took her life.
Oh yeah, that's right. Yeah.
And I remember sitting with the wonderful director of the creative writing department, George Starbuck, who was a friend of hers, a dear friend. And I was 18. What did I know? But just seeing the resignation on his face, and sort of beginning to see that life can get pretty difficult and complicated. So I continued to work on poetry and get a degree in it. But it was then gradually unfolded into more focus on the healing aspect of it. We can talk about that. I hope that
Yeah.
doesn't go on too long, that answer.
No, it doesn't, because as you know, for me, um, I've penned a few poems, and it's amazing
Uh-huh.
because what you said about the skater on the ice, and
Yeah.
you were so interested in it. You wanted to
Close.
be able to put something over on the paper that had the same experience
Yeah.
you were
Oh,
seeing.
her. Her. I was seeing her, you know?
Right, and that's what poetry means to me. I mean, it's like I can be walking, hiking, and a poem would just come to my mind,
Yes.
and I say it. It never gets recorded because by the time I get back to pen and paper, I've forgotten what it was, but it had an impact on me anyway.
Yeah. Yeah.
It still resides somewhere within my being.
Yes.
And
And
when people are suffering, like you suffered with your leg,
uh-huh.
they need to have an avenue of expression that they don't even know they have, which is sometimes art or writing a poem or
Yeah.
what or drawing, whatever. So yeah, you've had so much experience with that. You've dedicated your life to it.
Well, it's true.
So just tell us about what you've experienced with this, your whole work.
Well, you asked the question, before we were going to talk, what does a poetry therapist do? What
Mhm.
does a poetry therapist do? So of course, I've been looking at this for a long time, and I think the poetry therapist, like any person who's going to be in a helping path, would want to be able to listen. So for me, the experience of learning how to listen um, is very important. Um, when I was there's a whole lot of things that lead up to this, but in 1984, late 84, 85, I was introduced to a wonderful pioneer in the field of poetry therapy named Joy Sheeman.
Mm.
And Joy was something I didn't even know existed, but a poetry therapist at El Camino Hospital in Mountain View, California.
Mm.
And we were connected. I, I had done some work with a wonderful man named Stephen Levine. If anybody,
Yep.
he died about 5 years ago, but
Mm.
Stephen worked a lot with people who were dying, and he was a sort of a student was mentored by Elizabeth Kubler-Ross back in the 70s. But when I met him, we made a really good connection, and he asked me to read at some of his longer. Well, actually, I ended up managing some of them, but he ended up asked me to read some poems at some of his longer retreats. So this is about 1983, and I remember reading some poems to people who were gathered for his retreat, Conscious Living, Conscious Dying. And an orthopedic surgeon came up to me, which feels like a little bit of poetic justice, given my life experience as a child and as a teen, seeing orthopedic surgeons a lot. He said, "There's a woman who does poetry and healing like you do." And I don't know that I had actually ever sort of quite, put those words together, but that's how I was introduced to Joy. He worked at the same hospital that Joy worked at. And so I was introduced to her, and I found out there was this fledgling field called poetry therapy that had developed some guidelines and requirements. And so I ended up working with her for about 2.5 years. And the reason I'm going to come back around to my comment about listening is, as I was beginning in 1985 to work with Joy, I asked myself, what am I here to learn? And
Mhm.
I want to read this poem to you, if I could.
Yes, please.
Because this poem, you said earlier when you were hiking on a path, something just comes to you. Now, I'm not saying that's how it always goes at all, but this poem kind of arrived on its own. I feel in response to my question, what am I really here to learn?
Yeah.
And it wasn't the only thing I was there to learn, but it was this. So the poem is called When Someone Deeply Listens to You. When someone deeply listens to you, it is like holding out a dented cup you've had since childhood and watching it fill up with cold, fresh water. When it balances on top of the brim, you are understood. When it overflows and touches your skin, you are loved. When someone deeply listens to you, the room where you stay starts a new life, and the place where you wrote your first poem begins to glow in your mind's eye. It is as if gold has been discovered. When someone deeply listens to you, your bare feet are on the earth, and a beloved land that seemed distant is now at home within you.
Yeah. It's
When,
beautiful.
when someone deeply listens to you, your bare feet are on the earth, and a beloved land that seemed distant is now at home within you.
Yeah. Those beautiful words. I think, isn't that in the beginning of your book, Poetic Medicine?
Actually, it's in the book, Finding What You Didn't Lose.
Okay. Yeah. That book, and I want to just put that up again. Uh, that's how people can check it out.
Yeah.
The other post is almost too big. It doesn't show up good. Thank you. That was a beautiful poem.
So, so I feel like that poem has reminded me. People have enjoyed that poem for 3 decades or for a long time, and yet it constantly is a reminder to me about what it doesn't happen like just because you sort of takes paying attention to listen. It asks for paying attention. But what does a poetry therapist do? So by listening, I can learn from someone what their concerns are, where their hurt is felt, um, what they have longed for, what they celebrate in their life. And so then I can call upon just all kinds of poems that I make myself aware of, and so that's what a poetry therapist does. He or she becomes aware of the incredible wealth and abundance and possibilities that are found within poems, and I can bring them to a person. And it's not like I say, well, this is. I don't want to sound prescriptive because I don't know, but I develop a pretty good sense. But then the person themselves will say, that poem just affirmed, reminded me, um, reflected exactly what I have been feeling. And then the next step, Wanda, what a poetry therapist does is, well, how can we connect that to your own inner life, your own way of seeing the world? And so maybe I take like that poem I just read, that when someone deeply listens to you, like if I gave you the line, when someone deeply listens to me, ...
Yeah.
that using the ellipse to say, you take that and make it your own. So
Yeah.
the other thing I would say a poetry therapist does is to make the focus one of appreciation and deep listening and um, acceptance.
Yeah.
So it's not like, well, we're going to critique this poem and really figure out, what lines are just superfluous, or what, in other words, to sort of find its weaknesses, so to speak. Like, I really, a poetry therapist, at least I do, avoid like evaluative words. Better, worse, good, bad. I mean, all those, to me, in a way, it's not that they're not helpful in this particular place, but they're so rarely do they say anything that actually helps anybody, or helps us to see deeper. So
Yeah.
maybe as a poetry therapist, if you read your poem to me when someone deeply listens to me and you wrote something, I could mirror back to you a line. I could just say, that line, Wanda. And I could, if I can just make a note to myself or even remember a word, the idea of mirroring back to you something that is yours.
Yeah.
So rare in our regular world to have someone just stay with what we've made. Anyway, that's somewhat of what a poetry therapist does.
But that's interesting because when I write, and many times I've written poems when I've been suffering, okay?
Yeah.
Sometimes a mental, emotional suffering, and I don't edit the poem. It just spits out on the page.
Right.
And I might, put it, how I place it on the page.
Yes.
It says something too,
Yes.
If it's staccato and
yes,
that there's a lot, maybe anger in me.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And you got to get it out. I think
sort of choppy. That's staccato.
Yeah, right. Yeah. And so that's what the therapeutic healing property of poem making would be for me if I was teaching it, which I hope to have some classes in making poems together, because I think it just is a way to build community, and also to build community within your own being,
Well, absolutely. Excuse me. I mean, everything you just said is true and accurate. And something about when you talk about that word staccato, it's like if I was angry, and that word, the sense of staccato was a way of giving voice to that. But I'm going to suggest that there's an element of definitely an element of creativity here, and there's an element of playfulness. I mean, not like necessarily balloons and ice cream, but it's you're making your poem so it's staccato. It involves you being creative, and involves you sort of playing around with words, and how that they don't have to stand up and line and go. Like, I once was told that I used to say a poem is where you don't have to write all the way across the page.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
So, but there is some capacity to mess around, to play with words, which I think connects us to a more childlike connection to ourselves. And in my work with poetic medicine, I'm often, leaning into some very serious things. People dying or trying to recover from cancer, or people who have sorrowful. And so I don't say, well, let's just play around, but I have poems by children who also have dealt with these things, have responded to these things, I should say. And I like sharing the poems of children with adults, because it helps them to sort of to set down some of their defenses.
Yeah. Do you have one from a child?
Sure.
Did you want to share?
Sure.
Okay.
And children are much more, I say much more, they're, I hope that they will continue to surprise us by what they have to say. Mm-hmm. So, and making a space for them to. So here's a little story. I was working with a group of 5th graders, 11-year-olds, and I took in a bowl of words. I don't have it here to show you, but it's a bowl or a basket that has just hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of words in it. And you can pluck the words out of the bowl and you can throw them back. You can change them. One time, I like the music of the composer Bach. And, so that's fine. But Bach, I put Bach into my word bowl. And one day it came back with an E in jam between the B and the A. Beach. Much more useful for a poem.
I love that. That's great.
So that's the other thing. Children can sometimes take risks that adults will avoid. But anyway, so I had this bowl of words, and the child Carolyn picked out, a fingerful of words. And then she came up to me and she said, "Mr. Fox, I don't know what this word means." So this is about 27 years ago. But anyway, the word was rivulet. Rivulet. She said, "I don't know what this word means." So my sense was not to go to the dictionary and find out the exact dictionary definition. I wanted her to have a feeling for it, a sense for it. So I said, well, a rivulet is a little stream of water, is a stream of water that you could probably jump across. So she went back to her desk and she had these other words, and she had her own words, because she didn't have to use just the words that were in the bowl. She could include whatever word she thought of. So she wrote a poem called Friendship, and it goes like this. This is Carolyn Keene. Friendship is eternity. Like two little rivulets that flow side by side forever. Between the two lies the vision of sweetly being. And when ashamed, they release and flow down different sides of the mountain. But then again, slowly, oh boy.
Oh, boy, yeah.
But then again, slowly, you can see them side by side together. 7 lines. And I apologize for not remembering it exactly. But I'm going to look it up real quick. I'll say it again. It's a short poem, but it's just 7 lines. Okay, this is Carolyn's poem. Friendship is eternity, like two little rivulets that flow side by side forever. Between the two lies the vision of sweetly being. And when ashamed, they release and flow down different sides of the mountain. But then again, slowly but surely, you can see them side by side again. She,
Profound.
11 years old.
Profound.
And, she was willing to take a risk. Asked me, like, what does this word mean? But if I could show you the poem, you would see that line, the poem is 7 lines. So that means there is an absolute middle line. So her middle line is when ashamed, they release. So
the breaking point.
The breaking point, and then she comes back to her opening, somewhat abstract statement, which she makes visible by using the rivulets as her image. But so there's without trying to be too technical or articulate, there's a middle in the poem, and Carolyn realizes that this happens in life, and when ashamed, they release. We don't know exactly why she may have put that line there. I don't know, but there's a balance in her natural way of expressing herself. So anyway, I think we started talking about how children have this capacity, and she was literally playing with the words. She's just shaping them into this form. So,
you don't know. I was in a writing class one time, and the teacher just gave us this thing. I don't remember exactly, but it was, I saw this I saw this homeless man
Huh.
and blah, 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 blah. And I took that
Okay.
and I was absolutely shocked at what came out of me,
Mm, mm.
you know,
Well,
just being able to allow something deep inside, often hidden, to flow out. It's just an amazing
I-
process.
so so may I ask you, Wanda, when you say shocked? So I also can I hear that word also as a kind of surprise? Did
Oh,
did,
yeah.
did it surprise you?
Yes, it surprised me because what came out was something that I didn't realize how judgmental I was about
Oh, oh,
homeless people.
uh-huh,
Okay.
uh-huh.
And I just didn't even, it was writing, free stream without thinking.
Yes,
And, that's what poem making sometimes is for me. I don't know what I'm going to say.
right.
Will sit
Well,
and I will see a painting like in my house, and it will shock me into, excuse me, just as my phone went off. It'll shock. It is
yeah,
not a surprise, maybe not always a shock, but
well, yeah. I mean, I appreciate the word shock. So in the book Poetic Medicine, the first page, very first page, I think about the third paragraph, I bring up this sense that one of the most healing things about working with poetry in this way that makes room for it, where you're not immediately critiquing yourself, but you allow the feeling to rise up of being shocked or being surprised, that's one of the most healing
feeling.
capacities of it, because it sort of puts our mind, our psyche, and sometimes even our body into a new place where we didn't, like, you didn't know that you actually harbored that kind of judgment, and writing on the page allowed you to look at it. Did that allow for some further consideration?
Yeah, it made me cry.
Oh boy, see. Ooh.
I have it somewhere. I don't know where it is right now, but yeah, it really touched me. And was that healing for me? I think in some ways it was.
Uh-huh.
It's like a poem always heals me a bit. Okay,
Yeah,
whether I'm reading someone else's poem or it's something that has come forth from within me.
yeah,
Uh,
yeah. So
and I love. Is this on the first page, which says poetry provides guidance,
I think,
feeling what you did not know you knew before you wrote or read the poem?
yeah, yeah. Does that ring true?
Yeah, this moment of surprising yourself with your own words of wisdom
Uh-huh.
or of being surprised by the poems of others is at the heart of poetry as healer.
Yep.
I will try to put that up on our page too, because I love that. I remember reading it.
So the sense of feeling that it made you cry. See, we use the word healing. It's almost ubiquitous, isn't it? Like,
Yeah.
and I don't want to, um, sell myself down the river, but sometimes I'm not even really sure what that means. I think it means to be able to attend to myself and to others as whole persons.
Yeah, right.
Um, but for you, it was the actual experience of that your poem brought tears to your eyes, and whatever was involved in that, to me, is, I always feel, I wonder that poetry has these two wings. Like if it's a bird, it has two wings. One of the wings is its evocative nature. So, like reading that poem by Carolyn Keene, it evoked that response in you. But listening to the woman talk about homelessness and you writing, that's the expressive wing. So it's, I've compared it to like an in breath and an out breath.
Yeah, yeah,
Like the evocative is the in breath, and the out breath is, they're both. If I hold my breath in, I'm gonna die. But so the out breath is the expressive nature of it, and I can't help but share with you in this living moment, this poem by a kid named Alec in
Okay.
5th grade. So I had taken in a bunch of postcards, and one of the postcards was a very old man with a big beard and a old coat with a skeet cap and a long stick. And so Alec picked that card and he took it back to his desk. And I said, "Let this card speak to you. And if it tells a story, what does the story say?" So he wrote a poem which he called "A Thousand Layers Deep."
Mm.
John was sitting on the sidewalk begging for food. The man walked down 5th Avenue ignoring him. He was part of the scenery and people tried to avoid him. His pain was 1,000 layers deep. After all, he was just a bum, the man thought. What does he deserve? Go get a job. John cried.
Yeah.
John cried on its just own line. Alec, 5th grade. I'm hoping that Alec took this poem in his life, and that line, his pain was 1,000 layers deep. Very. And then a lot of people or many people have sometimes said, which man was he talking about? And then he also included, and this is playfulness, the card was actually a picture of the novelist Leo Tolstoy.
Mm-hmm.
But he didn't say, so he thought of the word fifth. The man walked down 5th Avenue. What do you think of when you think of 5th Avenue?
Prosperity, abundance,
Yeah.
flashiness.
Flashiness, wealth. Just so he was making this contrast. Anyway,
It's amazing. Yeah, I know. Gosh, we could go on forever. I love it. Because I think in poems in a way, and I think it's a very healing thing to be able to do that.
yeah.
Read sometimes with my dear friend, we'll read poems together, and sometimes we'll just, as I said, go for a walk and we'll just create a poem as we walk. I will give one line, and she'll give another line, and before you know it, we've written something quite beautiful. But it's written in the air, and that's okay. It's okay because it's just you've already expressed it.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I used to be in plays a lot when I was a child, and so I was in musicals. So it's like I like that. I like the sense of that you can just break out in song or break out in a poem, as you go along in your daily life. So maybe we can invite people who are listening, to find a friend and read some poems to kind of stoke the fire a little bit, and then go out and do this practice of exchanging lines.
Yeah, I think it's powerful, to do that. I just was going to say something else, and I lost my train of thought. Okay, lots of comments here, so I appreciate that.
Yeah.
Let me see.
Should we talk about the Institute?
Yes, please do.
Okay. So I've been doing this work, since that time with Stephen Levine, really. So 1981. And then, things unfolded. I did the training with Joy. And then I had the opportunity to write some books. Wonderful publisher, wonderful man, Jeremy Tarcher, invited me to do that. And then, I've taught at a number of places, graduate level, a course in poetry therapy. And unfortunately, because many of these graduate programs wanted to get aligned with officialdom, like the APA, for instance, this course I was teaching got sort of cut out of the curriculum, unfortunately. Not that it was not appreciated, but so in about 2004 or 5, I had had some previous experience with getting grants to work with cancer patients from the wonderful Lloyd Symington Family Foundation. And so I would put those the grant money into a nonprofit called the National Association for Poetry Therapy Foundation, and I would draw from it as I went around the country working with cancer patients. And at some point, after the first year, I realized this isn't working as well as it could. I could have, because I'm just going in for 3 days, say, and then ride my horse off. But I wanted people to get some regularity in what they were doing. So I knew people in different cities like Atlanta, Philadelphia, Seattle, who could follow up from me. So the next year I wrote them into the grant. So they would do like 6 follow-up sessions, and I would pay them from this grant from Symington. So then I thought I really like this. I really like how this works, but I need to create my own nonprofit, my own 501c3. And then this is where I'm going to, appeal to your listeners. We are definitely run by donations that we get, and I'm welcoming those. But since 2005, we've been an official nonprofit, and I've funded many IPM has funded many projects, working with immigrant and refugee youth, working with people overcoming addiction, working with women who've experienced domestic abuse. For a couple of years, we worked with people with traumatic brain injury.
Wow.
My second eldest sister, Shelley, had suffered a traumatic brain injury early in her life, so this was important to me, and I was more than happy to find a wonderful practitioner, Krista Harrison, who ran these group she called the Rediscovery Project. Often when you have a brain injury, it is a process of rediscovering. So, and that's just a small handful of the people and the sort of for the purposes that we funded. So we also have a training program that I've been leading since 2012. And certainly we have a lot of resources people can draw upon. If people are interested, they could go to the 3 W's and then poeticmedicine.org.
Yeah, Tom, will you put that in? Put the website for the Institute of, is that right?
Yeah. I think if people just do poeticmedicine.org, they'll get there.
Okay.
And then there's a Facebook page for it as well.
Okay.
I know people have different feelings about Facebook. But the sense of, it gives me great joy to be able to see, and those projects, like the project we funded, provided seed money for working with women who've experienced domestic abuse. There's somebody put it in there. So we, this poetry partner, I call them poetry partners, Jim Elsasser, wonderful man, able to really bring poetry across to a wide range of people. But he was working with women who have experienced domestic abuse and sexual assault. And he was working with a clinician, Gwen Federico, who was the founder of this organization where he worked called Daisy in Newton, New Jersey. Anyway, Gwen Federico saw its value. And so in the next year, she was writing a grant to the state of New Jersey for Daisy, an overall grant to help fund their work. So she included the poetry project, which is called Rise Up. She included the Rise Up Poetry Project in her grant to the state of New Jersey, and they have funded it now for the past 2 or 3 years. So that is, like totally success. And that, we seed a project, then it gets picked up or recognized by, someone sort of closer at hand even. So if people are interested in the Institute for Poetic Medicine, I'd be glad to. And my email address is john@poeticmedicine.org.
Tom will put that in there too, and that'll show up.
So,
You know what?
Yeah.
So I could go on forever.
You can go on, but we've had a lot right now.
Yeah, I know.
Oh, I was going to share a couple of my poems.
Please, yeah, go ahead.
Should I do that?
Yep, please.
Okay, so I shared the listening poem. So this is a poem that I wrote when I was 18. I just turned 19, I guess. And I went back to school, went back to BU, and I was committed to just going on as normal, like otherwise to deny what had happened to me. My leg had been amputated and there was a lot of pain and it was difficult. But at one point in the November of 1974, I got a contusion on the end of my residual limb or stump. I have a harder time, and I couldn't wear my prosthetic leg for months. And so I was not keen to go out into public. Guess it's a lot of vanity or something, but I was not keen to be seen. And so, but what am I going to do? Stay in my dorm room? That's not going to work for very long. So I had a wonderful counselor at that point, a man named John Lambden, I'm grateful for. I also had been influenced very strongly by the teachings of Ram Dass. If anybody members have, but my longing for God was strong, but my desire to not be seen was almost stronger. So I wrote this poem, and I wish people could see it because the way it's laid out. Actually, we talked about staccato earlier. And there's a way that there's a certain section of the poems that's very staccato, because sometimes I couldn't finish a sentence. The poem is called Even to This. What my thoughts have troubled about all through the night after night. It's so very scary. Sometimes I feel would rather, what's the worst that could happen? Because it just hurts too much for having had enough of my own self-hatred against myself. Lonely is nowhere else to go. Time to stop feeling sorry for myself. Time to open my heart even to this and call to God. John Fox.
Yeah. Wow.
Nowhere else to go. There wasn't. I put that in italics.
Nowhere else to go.
And then if people could see this, I'd want them to know that I certainly wouldn't go around telling people, well, just stop feeling sorry for yourself. That's not for anyone, in my opinion, anyone to do, but I could say it to myself. That's something I can say to myself. And so that was a very, it didn't make everything rainbows and roses, but it was a very helpful poem to write, to get the truth out in that way.
Yeah.
And I think it's important if someone's hearing this kind of thing for the first time, that they not think, well, that sounds pretty grim. It wasn't. It was an expression of really my deeper truth, which Emily Dickinson said, truth is such a rare thing, and it is delightful to tell it.
And isn't that part of the whole thing we're talking about?
That is a big part of the whole thing we're talking about. That's the first quote in Finding What You Didn't Lose. Jeremy Tarter had this wonderful, now everybody's doing it, a lot of people are doing it, but
This book.
That's in Finding What You Didn't Lose. It's truth is such a rare thing, and it is delightful to tell it. So should we close, Wanda?
I guess. So, I with one promise.
Yeah.
If and when I get a poetry group started, we can Zoom you in briefly.
Yeah, sure.
Okay, I don't know when that's going to happen because I have to turn people on to this idea that they have something to speak.
Yeah,
You
well,
know?
that's really important. Everyone has something that they need. No one else can speak it for them, actually.
That's right.
And I finding what you didn't lose is meant to make poetry accessible to you, to anybody. And then poetic medicine deals with a little more. I mean, they both deal with life experiences, and those can be challenging. But poetic medicine really looks at grief, looks at family relationships, looks at relationships. Also, importantly, I feel the latter part of the book looks at our relationship to the living earth. There's a
Oh, yeah.
chapter called The Peace of Wild Things. And I felt, that it was after we respond to ourselves, we need to remember that we're part of something much, much larger. So then the second to last chapter is called Poems of Witness, living with heart in a conflicted world. And right now, I feel those poems of witness we're called to consider them. The last chapter was there is a secret one inside us. So, but here I mentioned this girl who I watched skate, and I don't have that poem anymore. That poem is like somewhere,
Yeah, it's there
No,
somewhere.
my wonderful a Greek poet who I loved, Odysseus Elytus. Maybe it's the last name is Odysseus Elytus, but he said, "No voice is lost in the breast of the sky." So anyway, this poem, I wrote a poem years later called Poetry. And it was remembering that experience of watching that girl skate. So I'll read that as we close.
Okay.
It's called Poetry. Let's see. I want to be looking at the screen when I read it, if I can. Here it is. She skates boldly onto the page, tips one vulnerable foot back and forth slowly till finally the edge of a toe cuts a simple sharp line through the world's cold resistance. And with that plain courage, a statement of intention begins, and you can't turn back any longer from the weight of feeling and letting go into the flow that follows. Poetry is a choice to feel it all, not all at once, but gradually to sink down within ourselves, to give what fear we hold behind our knees the gravity and grace, to discover what makes our whole world turn, the place our necessary weight lifts to lightened joy. Poetry is a choice to feel it all, not all at once, but gradually to sink down within ourselves, to give what fear we hold behind our knees to gravity and grace, to discover what makes our whole world turn, the place our necessary weight lifts to lightened joy.
Oh, goodness gracious. Okay, John, how can I ever thank you for
Oh,
spending this time with us? And I know, if there's anything we can do, and we will certainly support the Institute,
mm,
make a donation. And I love the
well,
work. I love it so much. It's like maybe,
I, Wanda, I just think that what you shared about your own experiences are really important for people to. I mean, I'm really glad to be part of this, but I feel like you talking about walking with your friend, about the home response to the homeless man, the poem about the homeless man, all kinds of things is like that's where I hope to sort of nourish and support and appreciate everybody's feeling. I remember one time, this is the last story. One time I was on a plane, we were going, and this gentleman was sitting next to me, kind of burly, bearded. Um, he made he did something with um, video games,
Hmm.
Then I thought, well, I'm not sure I'm going to have much that he's going to be able to relate to, but of course I'm there. So this is a long time ago. So I shared that I would work with poetry and healing and explained a little bit about that. And he said, can I read you something? So he got up, went in the overhead bin, got this worn envelope out that had a lot of paper folded in it. And in those folded papers was a poem he had written to his wife about having been tempted to step outside their marriage and how he decided not to do it. And he had written that all in a poem.
Amazing.
And so that kind of blew my mind a little bit, like don't make too many assumptions because you're probably mistaken. I'm probably mistaken. So.
Yeah. We make so many perceptions are often wrong.
Huh.
They're only seeing a little bit of something, and it's not the whole picture. So anyway,
Okay.
I am going to close out right now. Great gratitude to you.
Be well.
And to all the people that have been here with us. And
Yeah.
folks, remember this is recorded. You can go back and watch it again, which I would highly encourage you to do, and share it with your family and your friends and your kids. Okay.
Yeah.
So we got a lot of wonderful interviews coming up. We're going to be interviewing a friend of mine, I think next week, who has had tremendous amount of healing challenges, and she's going to help us realize how she's turned that into her own creative heaven. I like to think of. So you want to join us? I think it's next week or coming up real soon. But John, thank you so much. And I will see you in a moment on the other side. Okay.
Okay.
Thanks, everybody.
Have a good day, people.
Thank you.